Okay, little orphan Annie comes to our house to stay and wash the cup and saucers up and brush the crumbs away and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and sweep and make the fire and bake the bread and earn her board and keep. All of us other children, when supper things is done, we gather around the kitchen fire and has the mostest fun, a-listening to the witch tales that Annie tells about, and the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Great stuff. Well, some of you that are more senior members of our audience, I don't know, but when I was in elementary school, every October, you know, we all recited, you know, sort of the build up to Halloween, and there was the Chicago Tribune, that one of the cartoonists made almost a whole page, wasn't it? It was a very large, yeah, and so you know, there it was on every bulletin board, and everybody was going, and the goblins will get you. I recall, like I say, having to recite that. And when you're in the first and second grade, goblins were very real. You know, I was thinking about, I mean, today, it may not be recommended anymore for consumption by little children, except, my gosh, the stuff on TV is like 100 times worse. I remember when I was a little bit older, the first scary movie that I attended was The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Do you remember that one? Whoa, now that was creepy, but it got worse. Okay, anyways, my goal today is to explore folk tales and plain weird stories that may be true and maybe not, from 19th century Grant County, Indiana. Now, I have used as a source for much of the information on this period this wonderful book. This is a photocopy, but they've got, I think they have a copy over on the other side. This is the Indiana Room's copy. I did discover somebody has published this. It's on Amazon for like 14 bucks, but it's listed as a public domain. I think what they did, I just didn't have time to order up a copy. I would. It looks nice, you know, from the cover, but it's a wonderful book. Now, the other thing I like about it, it was compiled by Marion High School, my Marion High School colleague, Cora Strawn. Now, Cora was long gone by the time I came on the scene, but she taught the social studies department at Marion High School. This was compiled by her students in 1921. And I think Miss Strawn was somewhat of a pioneer herself. This is a wonderful compilation of stories collected largely, but not entirely, largely from members of the Octogenarian Club. You know, you've probably heard about that, the museum that was at the park. Don't get me started on that one. But anyways, it was a place for, well, people in their 80s to get together and talk and reminisce and, you know, that sort of thing. And I know Cora did this. She said, there is an opportunity for a well, she didn't say cool, a wonderful project. I'll just send my kids out there and make them do it, which is exactly my philosophy. Also, you know, you got a cool project, you just grab up a bunch of kids and make them do it. Now, one quick story about the octogenarians meeting at the park. I don't think they still do, but they did until, I don't know, like in the 80s or 90s. Because there was an old guy in Marion named Milo Fields, and Milo was a character, big character. And he called me. He'd come up from Texas and spend the summer. He called me, he said, Munn, I got to go out to the party out at the park. I said, okay, Milo, I'll come and get you. So I came and got him. I took him out there and I said, okay, when would you like me to pick you up? And he said, we can have it all talked out in 15 minutes. I said, okay, I'll be back in 15 minutes. I came back to pick him up and he was sitting on a park bench with one of his colleagues from yesteryear. And the poor soul was, he was feeble, really. I mean, the man was, not Milo was hot, but, you know, and so I got Milo in the car, we were driving back, and I said, sorry about your friend, obviously, he been failing? He said, oh, hell no, he's always been like that. You young people think that people just get that way because they're old. Some of these people were like that all the time. So I've kept that in mind. It's a good thing to store away, okay? Now, and I do, in putting this together, I use Miss Strawn's book and my own compilation of newspaper columns, radio shows, and blogs, and I hope to keep alive her work. And so the library has devoted major shelf to the kids' work, okay? And it's nice, it's good, okay? What I've done here, this is a little different than my usual topics, you know, if we're talking about Grant County and the Civil War. I mean, it's a march, you know, we do it that way. This is not a march through folk life of Grant County. I just picked out some interesting stuff. And hey, you know, if you got questions, ask away, or if you want to contradict, that's fine, because, you know, the people that told the stories are all dead, so what are they going to say? Now, I've chosen the following headings to organize the presentation. Okay, 1, ghost stories. Okay, we have to start out with ghost stories, right? 2, wild animal stories. Some great stuff. And then 3, tunnel stories. If I hear one more person tell me about tunnels, I'll scream. But everybody's got a tunnel story. Well, I remember old Jake's farm and the tunnel out to the barn. No, that wasn't. But anyways, okay, so tunnel stories, and what did I say, the last one? Oh, this is 4 and 5. 4 is giants, and 5 is little people. So brace yourself, okay? Now, ghost stories have always enjoyed a certain amount of popularity around the fireplace, or the furnace, or the camping trips, or riding in a car. The scarier, the better. Remember one-armed guy stories? You know? God, that was scary. Okay? Unfortunately, I think modern storytelling of that sort has suffered from inflation. You know, where you've got some guy wandering around with a hockey mask and a chainsaw. That's just a bit over the line, I'd say. Okay, now, most ghost stories, by the way, were cautionary tales. You know? That's a cautionary tale. You better be good, or the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. I don't know how good that was as child psychology, but I think it worked. You know, you'd be snatched through the chimney and goodbye you, okay? So, yes, and they were told frequently for entertainment and for, what do you call it, remediation, you know, getting your kids to act right, okay? Now, yes, I want to dip into the book to get some stories here. Now, by the way, ghost stories are not like Shakespeare plays, you know, or any sort of dramatic thing. They have a beginning and an end, and usually no middle. Okay, it's just like they saw a ghost, okay, and they got rid of it. So I don't foresee anybody screaming or fleeing the place, but it's now this one I just happen to like. Well, that's the nice thing about giving these talks. I pick out the ones I like. You may say, man, what a wasted time. I don't like that. Okay, the ghosts that went down into the ground. One day during the winter of 1890, a farmer living north of Marion butchered some hogs, and among them was one that wasn't fit for meat. This gave some of the boys an idea to play a joke. Now, you see, a lot of these invariably have to do with some of the boys. All right. Now, when I was growing up, Halloween, it was sort of an excuse for boys to run around and do, you know, smash pumpkins and do all that stuff. Some of you may have participated in the burning of the outhouses out in Franklin Township, you know, at Miller and 10th Street. You know what I'm talking about? I came here in '78, that was still going on. Only in that case, it was some of the girls actually. I think what was called the Bucktown Babes took over the outhouse burning, but there weren't many outhouses left. But anyways, okay, so some of the boys, this is some of the boys, to play a joke on a group of farmers who held meeting at number 4 schoolhouse in Washington Township. Now see how I came to Marion, I taught it at the school over there, Washington, you know, junior high. Okay, the farmers who held these meetings belonged to an organization called the Farmers Alliance and would never allow any of the boys to attend their secret meetings, much to the disgust of the boys. Now you see, a little note, this is annotated story here. The Farmers Alliance was a populist group. It was started by farmers to protest railroad fees and interest rates, and it was mostly in like Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, but it was in Indiana too. And they ended up as big backers of Bryan, William Jennings Bryan. Okay, so they were organizing a protest, okay? So they weren't allowed in the meetings, so the boys were disgusted. I'm sure they would have loved a discussion about farm prices, but okay. A group of, okay, they were about 17 or 18 years of age. They decided to take the dead hog and try to scare the farmers at their meeting. That night after the butchering, so after taking all the hair off the body, they left it outside to freeze. This is a highly developed plot. Okay, then they took some red paint and painted the head, and this together with the wide open mouth presented a ghastly appearance. I'll bet. They also took some of the hair and stuck it on the shoulders so that the hog would resemble a lion. That was a particularly hairy hog, if you ask me. That evening, a short time after dark, this group of mischievous boys started across the field toward the schoolhouse, carrying the frozen body of the hog. There was no snow on the ground, and everything was frozen, later to be discovered. In order to make a safe escape doubly sure, they sent one of their party around the road with a horse and buggy that would be waiting after them after their joke had been completed. You know, the driver, the escape guy, okay? Arriving at the yard of the schoolhouse, they carefully looked around to make sure they had not been seen. Then they cautiously mounted the steps of the porch. As soon as they were on the porch, frosty boards began to creak as if in warning to those inside who were busily engaged in conversation. The boys gained the door in safety and carefully placed the stiffly frozen body against the door, standing it up on its hind feet and with the front feet and head against the door. All the boys but one quickly retreated to the waiting buggy, and the other, after giving a quick loud knock, joined his companions, and they were safely out of reach before the door opened. The farmers, when disturbed by the loud knock, first hesitated, and then one of them advanced to the door and swung it open. With the opening of the door, the frozen hog fell foremost into the group of astonished farmers, almost falling against the man who opened the door. All the farmers gasped in surprise when they saw the unusual object plunge into their midst, uninvited. And a number of them felt rather weak and nervous, for the painted, frozen body certainly presented a ghost-like spectacle when coming so suddenly out of the darkness into the rather dimly lighted room. It says, the president appointed a committee of 3 to bring the body, to take the body out to the woods and bury it. They never found out who was the guilty parties, and this was a small group of farmers had a good laugh over the joke they played, or the boys had a laugh over the joke they played upon the farmers. This affair is regarded by many as a real ghost story. Okay, see, some of the folks out there weren't buying it was a kid's prank. It was really a ghostly appearance. In one instance, a certain party said he could track the ghost up to the schoolhouse by drops of blood, and from there it could be traced into the woods, where it went down into the ground. Ghost story. Okay? I've got some more here. This one, let's see. One of Grant County's haunted houses. There used to be an old log house of one room and a loft about 12 miles below Marion on the Mississippi River. It was built by a pioneer from Ohio who was killed by the Indians soon after he settled there, and his wife was carried away by the Indians. The log hut was built several rods back from the road, which at this point ran through a dense forest. Naturally, after tragedies above mentioned, the house was said to be haunted. Naturally. Stories were told of fires and strange lights to be seen in the lower room, and mysterious sounds heard in the loft. As a result, no one would live in a house. One winter afternoon, three boys, now we're back to three boys, okay, living several miles up the river, decided they would hike to the hut and, if possible, find out just what caused the haunts. They arrived at the house middle of the afternoon. They were almost afraid to enter it. Finally, they ventured in, but heard nor saw nothing. So they built a fire in the great fireplace, declaring to each other to sleep there all night, and finally decided to do so. This is remarkably like something that I might have done. I mean, I can remember, going into an abandoned barn, finding an abandoned barn in the middle of the field. And so, your parents, don't go in that barn. Well, we did, and then you stayed overnight in the barn and heard all kinds of weird sounds. It was, it was pretty good entertainment. They were too frightened to speak, and the awful silence added to their terror. They listened intently and heard a sound as if someone were rocking in an old rocking chair. Then they heard a woman singing her baby to sleep. By this time, they were able to talk and reason that someone recently had moved in the house. They went up softly the peg steps to the loft to beg pardon for intruding. But when they got there, an empty rocking chair. One of the boys tried to summon his courage by sitting in the old chair. There was a roll of rag carpet standing in one corner of the loft. It began to rock back and forth. The two boys ran to the steps, but one sitting in the chair said, "Let us kick the devil out of that carpet," and kicked it vigorously. Some unseen force, which felt like a man's head, shoved them all down, not dead, and piled them in a heap at the bottom. They all plunged after the door at the same time and didn't stop their high speed until they were halfway home. Those who were not superstitious explained the matter by saying the wind blew through cracks in the old loft and produced the singing noise and the sound of the rocking chair. The rest, they said, was fear and imagination. A spoil sport. You didn't see any ghosts. Come on, give me a break. This next one, I'll just read a little part of it. I'm interested, any of you, I'm sure some of you do genealogy stuff. Nancy White Prickett. Anybody heard of Nancy White Prickett? Now, Nancy White Prickett really was a major pioneer in Grant County. And she lived for 86 years, okay? So, you're talking about most of the 18th, 19th century and even a part of the 20th century, okay? And she lived down the way from Joaquin Miller's farm. You know about Joaquin Miller, the poet of the High Sierras? Oh, we'll talk about him some more time. Okay. But anyways, she had a good time. She liked to sew, and she had a good life, and she was afraid of getting done in by the Indians. That's sort of a recurring theme in some of these. However, the Indians invited her to church, and she had a good time. There was a Baptist church out there, and so, okay. And the dinner was potatoes, and sweet potatoes, pie, cake, and other goodies. So they got along with the Indians. However, a ghost story. When her parents first came to Grant County, they lived near Jalapa in a log hut. The fireplace had a dirt floor. Once in a long while, water would rise up in this fireplace and put out the fire. They could not understand it. One time, a neighbor, Mrs. Bechtel, who was going to see them and had to pass through a lonely wood, midway of this wood, she saw a man coming toward her. He seemed to be a peddler, for he had a pack on his back. As he drew near, he disappeared mysteriously. She was disconcerted, to say the least. She was disconcerted, and Mrs. Prickett and a medium concerning the strange disappearance of the man. Melinda said spirits told her this man was Jim Clay, an Indian who was killed and then buried in the White's house. Or they built their house over the grave. Okay, so the only thing that would get the ghost out of the house was to dig him up. Okay, so they dug Jim Clay up and they buried him in the Indian cemetery, and things went well. No water in the fire police. Why call a plumber, right? Okay. But I do recommend that lady. She's got great stuff and a big history. Jalapa is a really cool place to look into. You know, a lot of things, not just 1812, but a lot of things went on out there. Oh, I want to talk just a minute, a couple of things, side issues. One is about spiritualism, okay? Now, I was doing some reading about a lot of these people. I don't think they practiced spiritualism, but they were aware of it. Okay, this was like the tipping table stuff, the communication with the dead, Chesterfield, right, in Madison County. Isn't that where the camp is? You know, it's still there. Okay, it was extremely popular in Indiana after the Civil War. And one historian I was reading explained it that, and I think we can understand this. The Civil War was so traumatic for families in Grant County, and families in Indiana, and families all over the United States, north and south. It was traumatic. You know, high casualty rates. Some of these little towns, all the male population was killed. That was it. Okay, like in one battle, one afternoon. I think those Indiana guys that wore the tall hats in the battle, you know, the 64, I forget what it was. You know, they lost like 90% of their regiment in 8 minutes.
Sowers.
You know, pardon?
The name of the Sowers?
Yeah.
In New York?
Yeah. So that has, you know, and now you're a wife and a kids, and you've tried to keep the farm together, and there was no safety net. You were out of luck. You know, now relatives could, you know, chip in and, you know, help out and all that kind of stuff, but most everybody was kind of in the same boat. And so a lot of them took up spiritualism. I think it was kind of like it was a way of talking to your husband or your son. Because in a lot of cases, their husband or son, they don't even know where he was buried. You know, now some of them got returned, but a lot of them were, you know, who knows where they are. And so I think it was a sincere desire to somehow, for completion. You know, like funerals, we know, are really completion rituals. You know, we're saying goodbye to the deceased. We are remembering them. We bury them. I mean, it's the same process, you know, only they couldn't bury him in a lot of cases. So what do we do? All right. Now, I do have a small thing here. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Pioneer burials. You know, I'm sure some of you have gone around to some of the cemeteries in Grant County, and I recommend it. They're really, and we have the listings from, you can find most of the listings of people that are buried there. You can go over here, and they've got it. It's online as well. Okay? And you can walk around and see things like, you know, you see mother and you see 5 kids buried. And then you see dad and the second wife, maybe the third wife. I mean, this had to do with infant mortality was horrendous. By the way, you know it still is. It's not like it wasn't then. I read infant mortality rate in Grant County is 26%. They don't survive, you know. Well, they really didn't survive back then because what do you do? Okay? And so, well, it says here, if anyone got sick in those days, someone had to go on horseback to get the doctor. The doctor in turn would come to the house on horseback to see the patient. Often the primitive remedy administered saved the life of the sick one. Sometimes death ensued, being frank. Kill or cure, right? Okay, and now the corpse was not embalmed. We're talking really like pre-Civil War and probably through 1870. Okay, now that doesn't mean there were funeral homes in Marion where they did embalming and that sort of stuff, but most of these pioneer folks, how are you going to do that? Okay, okay, not embalmed, but friends would keep cloths wet and camphor over the face. All right. Of course, the body could not be kept long, usually overnight. Neighbors would come to stay with the family and attend to the body. All right. When the person first died, he was laid on a cooling board until the coffin was made. Someone would take the measure of the body, then take the order to a cabinet maker or a carpenter. If there was no cabinet maker, who would make the coffin of walnut or oak. The dead was carried in a 2-horse wagon to the graveyard. A procession of friends followed the wagons, for the whole neighborhood would go to the funeral. People were very kind in those days, and much sympathy was shown. Friends always volunteered to dig the grave. And when the body arrived, they would take the lines from the harness and let the coffin down into the grave. You know, it's like when, you know, it's a parallel to what's done when the casket is taken out of the, you know, out of the car and lowered into the grave, right? You use the straps, okay. Let's see here. Okay, let's see. The undertaker did not go to the cemetery because his services were not needed. Okay, if a child died, it was always buried in white. If an adult, friends made a shroud of black material. Sometimes the individual was buried in his good clothes that he had worn while living. Now, sometimes the funeral service, the service was not held for months after the person died, for they could not procure a preacher until the circuit rider of that district made his rounds. When the preachers did preach the funeral, they usually told the truth about the life of the individual. Oh, well, that's a little different than today, right? He was a sinner. Oh, okay. I had the pleasure of working with, some of you know, Johnny out at Weaver. Okay. Can't remember Johnny's last name. Was it Jones? Well, anyways, he had a funeral. You know, we had some students from Marion High School, and the library assisted in the first restoration of the cemetery. There's been a second one, okay? Very nice. All right, so I attended Johnny's funeral, and that's what they did. Now, there was some embalming, but they had a wagon pulled by horses, and everybody walked from the church down the street all the way to the cemetery, and the body was put in the ground. You know, it was deeply moving. I really, you know, it's a hard time, but I think they had a sense of ceremony or of being there. The other thing that I found out from the guy that was helping us with the restoration, there's this very talented man who did that for a living, and he did it for free for the Weaver folks. He said, in the wintertime, if the ground was frozen, you couldn't bury the person. So you packed them in straw and canvas if you had it, and buried them in the haymow in the barn. I mean, you put them in there, and then took them out when you could finally break the ground. Also, he talked about, because of the death of children, if the mother and child died at the same time or within a short, which often happened, okay, they buried the infant and the mother together, always. Okay? and, or if it was grandma or whoever, if it wasn't mother, if mother still was alive, then they'd open grandma's grave and put the infant in with grandmother. You know, the idea being someone to take care of this child in the other world, you know. And I think you know the bit about the graves faced east, all right? They don't necessarily do that now, but toward Jerusalem, all right? Okay, so funerals. The reason I bring up funerals and spiritualism, I think both these things sort of contribute to this ghost story and, you know, these sort of stories. You know, there's a certain point in this whole, you know, funerary, dying and death and whatever. There comes a point when people can start joking, you know? And start telling, well, I remember Ed, you know, Ed just died a couple years ago, but Ed, man, he was something else. You know, this was the wake. Now, some people have those still in Marion. And I'm from Angola, and all of my family, after the funeral, there was a huge party. I think that's those Irish people, you know. But it was just wonderful. I mean, people would come up, and if you wanted to cry, just cry your eyes out. And somebody would hold you, you know, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so anyways, there's a lot more, but we don't have time. Oh, I want to talk about mounds. How many of you have heard from someplace that when they were building the courthouse, that they found a large mound with a 9-foot skeleton there? And the story goes that that's how the Marion Giants got their name. None of that's true, okay? Now, you would think if they found a 9-foot skeleton, it would have been preserved somehow. But it came up missing not long after those things were published. There's also a bunch of stuff about the building of the courthouse I like because, you know, even today when the county builds buildings, there's always some big fracas about this, shall we do that? You know, it's just human nature, that's the way it goes. Okay, and I think that what they were doing, sort of gilding the lily by making it, there was this 9-foot skeleton. Now, I found out Upland had a 7-foot skeleton, okay? They came a little late to the party. I mean, I think Marion's may have been second. So they came up with a 7-foot, then Marion said, not to be outdone, we'll have a 9-foot skeleton. But it too mysteriously vanished, you know. Maybe the spirit world reclaimed it. But what was there, and these were found all over Marion, especially in the area like from here to the river, and then on down all the way to 12-Mile Bridge, you know, graves. There were Native American graves, which were mounds. And some of these were ancient. You know, after all, you know, the Native Americans occupied this area for a very long time. The Miamis were sort of recent settlers in the whole scheme of things. I mean, maybe like, you know, like 1500s or 1600s, okay? And so what they would do is they would put the person's worldly goods in the mound. And they also put a lot of mussel shells, you know? You ever been down a river and seen where there used to be mussels? You know, there's whole shoals of them. I mean, they're all dead of pollution. Although a guy told me that somewhere upriver they're coming back, okay? Because it was pesticide and stuff that they don't use anymore. But that's what those were, and of course all the stuff was stolen out of those graves as much as possible. So, you know, the arrowheads, the whole business. And I know, as our museum people can tell you, I think in the 1970s, I forget the exact date, where there was a settlement with the government about stuff that had been given to museums and libraries, the arrowheads and stone pipes and baskets and all that stuff. You know, the Miamis and other tribes were going to court and saying, oh, we got to have this stuff back. This is our stuff. It's like if they opened Grandma's grave and took her ring off of her. I mean, you know, come on, give me a break. So I think that led to a lot of gruesomeness, you know, about that. I have written, I don't have time to go into it. I've written about the pauper cemetery out where well, it used to be Kmart. It's the Tree of Life. There was a pauper's farm was behind there. It was a big brick building, and it went away about 1880. Said George Steele. He owned land at Garthwaite Road for both the military hospital and the county asylum. He was a pretty smart guy, big in real estate. But anyways, they were widening the road. I think this happened in 1941. They were widening the road in front, and they needed fill dirt. So they went. The guy that owned the lot said, "Well, you can come back on my lot and take whatever you need." Okay. Well, they got back there, and about the second day they were taking stuff out. They came in the morning, and there were crowds of people out there. What they had done is uncovered unburied paupers. Okay, and the neighbors were coming in there and grabbing the hinges off the the caskets and whatever was there. These guys were paupers. I don't imagine it was too lush, but they were stealing the boxes. And they contacted the sheriff and said, "Well, what can we do about this?" And he said, "Well, I don't know any law against doing that, so guess let them have it." Okay, enough cemetery stuff. We got spirituality, cemeteries, giants. Oh, yes. Now see, Colin, our head guy here, brought up the little people. Okay, the stories. You know about the little people? The Hobbit land.
Oh,
Hobbit land. Now see, I knew about Hobbit land, but I used to ride my bike all over Grant County. I loved it, you know. I would never go down in there because I was afraid I would run into a pack of my students down there, either imbibing liquor or smoking dope, and I didn't want to get wrapped up in something like that. So I never had an opportunity to go out there. But I got the thing. Just a minute here. I gotta get let's see, where is it? Okay. You guys sharing Hobbit land stories? No, I'm just teasing. Boy, I remember one time I lived there. Kids used to go out there and camp for weeks in the summertime. God knows what they were up to. Okay. Okay. I found it. Oh, come on here. Ah, yes. The little people. Now, a lot of cultures have a tradition of little people, you know, like leprechauns and all that sort of stuff. Okay, this guy by the name of, this actually has a source, okay, so, let's see, his name is Bob Freeman, occult detective. That sort of ruins his credentials right there, but what the heck. It's the closest we can get to a story, so there you are. Okay, very few locals could tell you how Hobbit land got its name, besides the obvious Tolkien reference. But it's the sort of thing that seeps from the collective unconscious to take on a new life beyond, this is like Twilight Zone, simple folklore and urban legend. Why? Why, you ask? Because the Miami natives revered this area as the home of the Paisa. All right? Let me go on. What were the Paisa, you may ask? They were magical little people of the forest, akin to what Northern Europeans would call gnomes, fairies, or whites. I've never heard of whites. Okay. The Paisas were said to be dangerous trickster spirits, imbued with great magical powers, who stood between 2 or 3 feet tall. Paisa literally translate as little ones, aptly named. Some Miami traditions place the Paisa in a more important religious role, being guides who lead the spirits of the dead through 7 pillars. You know 7 pillars down Peru? by the way, people are getting online and they say, oh, go out and visit San Pillars. Please do, but give it some respect. That is a sacred place to Miami. You know, if you want to go down in a canoe and look at it, you know, or look on the bank, you know, but people want to go down there and have, well, you know people, they're thick. Okay, right here. When I was a child, I like this. When I was a child in Converse, this guy's been around the world. When I was a child in Converse, it was said that 2 local men had captured one of these creatures in an animal trap and kept it in their workshop near Fox Lake, but it escaped, most likely with the help of others of its kind. Any Converse people here? No? I'll have to call somebody. I didn't have time. Oh, you're from Converse?
Well, we used to live in the Amboy Converse area, but I've not heard this.
Okay, well, Amboy, that's a whole different place. It's not Converse. Okay, so anyway, yeah. As a teenager, Hobbitland was sacred territory for me and my friends. Yeah, I'll bet. And I guess for young people all across the Tri-County area. It had been for decades. It's where you slinked off far from the prying eyes of adults. It's where we took our girlfriends, told ghost stories around campfires, drank cheap alcohol, and smoked cigarettes for the first time. I might add, probably a few joints. Okay, it's a magical place where the veil between the world and the next is thin. I have had numerous encounters out in the Mississippi, along its river and surrounding forest, in its caves and abandoned places. I have heard the voices and sounds of things that could not be seen, and some that could, full-bodied apparitions, unnatural orbs, and spectral lights that danced upon the water. From 5 Mile Bridge, what is that, to Somerset, to 7 Pillars, and all the points between, there have been more mysteries than I could possibly account. So, there we are. We've solved, well, no, we haven't solved anything, but at least that is a thing that we'll have to check with our friends in Congress and see who it was that locked up the little people in their garage. I wouldn't have done that. I will say, and this is time to close, or if you got questions, that area between 4 Mile Bridge and all the way up to Hanging Rock and, you know, it is an amazing place. When I first got here, I had some friends that, now, we didn't go to Hobbitland, but say, come on, you just go up there, you know, take the road up to LeGros, and, you know, you can go around and see all this. There is a feeling out there of a very special place. It's beautiful. By the way, right now, I would guess, this is probably the last of the peak leaves, because I can recall going up there and you know, it was like pictures of Vermont. Okay, just really nice, okay? So who's to say? You know, I know the Miamis, when they were dedicating their schoolhouse, told me that the cliffs in the Mississippi, before you come to the dam, you know, those cliffs was the residing place of the great Manitou. This is where God came, the Great Spirit came to touch down and give his word to the Miamis. So, are there questions? And any other? Oh, nuts. I got 1 minute. Okay, let me do this. And I got to tell you about Moses Bradford. Anybody here at Bradford? If you're from Washington Township, you may be related to Bradfords. They had lots of kids. Okay, Moses Bradford was a big guy. He was over 300 pounds. He was called 300 Pounds of Righteous Indignation. Okay, he had worked, he was a Quaker, and he had worked on the Underground Railroad in Kentucky and Ohio, and the Kentucky folks chased him out. Said, yeah, no, you're not doing that here. And so he ended up in Marion, and he said the Methodist Church in Kentucky was so incensed by Bradford's work on behalf of fugitive slaves that his members offered a $200 reward for his capture. But he was an active participant in the Underground Railroad. Now, a consequence of his abolitionist activity, Bradford was the target of local groups organized for the purpose of returning fleeing slaves to their owners. Okay? Bradford's fences, now Bradford's fortress, his house, was, you know, where Bradford and Boot Street intersect. North Boots is up the road from my old buddy Dave Homer. You know, now the Bradford place was torn down about 1906 or 1907, but you can see the foundation in the backyard of that place. Okay, and it was big. It was a big. Well, he was a big man. All right. It said his son described the family residence as an arsenal with small windows in the upper story guarded by pitchforks and guns at convenient distances. He remembered lying on the floor while attempts were made to storm the house. On at least 2 occasions, Bradford's place was invaded. One of these times, intruders badly injured the house guest, Elder Wiggins, and threatened to kill Wiggins' infant child if the child cried out. The child survived. Miss Moses Bradford died in 1898. Okay? Now, the reason I said it about tunnels, there are no tunnels. They didn't. If you were hiding from the slave catchers, the last place you wanted to be was in a tunnel. Where they would go was into the barns. Barns have lots of access. Now, a lot of those houses had like root cellars and places to store the hams and that sort of business. There was some underground stuff, but not. I think the Underground Railroad people in Cincinnati have pretty well dispelled that. But Marion and Grant County were very big. Moses Bradford was a Quaker until he decided to get a gun, and then he became a Wesley. He was a Quaker. He sent Nathan Coggeshall sent slaves, if they came to his house, if the corn was in shock, he would tell them to run out to the field. And I can remember as a little kid playing in a cornfield. Man, you could get lost like nobody's business out there. Okay, so that's what they did. They didn't keep them dead. Not getting in a house. That's the story. Anything else? Did I destroy your preconceptions about giants? And who's to say? I mean, well, thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and seeing Bill talk to us about the spooky stories of Grant County in the 19th century. We've got some paraphernalia for the History Center over on display over there, and if anyone's feeling generous, please donate to the History Center. It really helps us keep doing events like this, and we hope to continue doing some in the future.
No. Sorry.
I don't know what to tell you.
So Bill, have you ever heard about this museum being haunted?
He told me about it. And I think Barbara may have said something about that. Barbara Love.
Uh-huh.
What was her name?
Melva.
Melva?
Well, when I became director, I used to ask Sue about it, Sue Israel, and she said, oh, no. And shortly after I became director, they said somebody wanted to see me in my office. And I went upstairs, and there was this guy there, and he said that he was in the Victorian room, or outside the Victorian room, and all of a sudden he heard someone and saw someone, and she said, Melva. So we assumed that maybe somebody in the library's past was named Melva, but they all looked and we couldn't find a Melva. But different people have heard stories here or heard noises. So you never
When I first moved to Grant County, I lived in Fairmount, and somebody in Fairmount asked me if I knew about Daisy. You ever heard about Daisy? That there was a woman, she was alive, she wasn't a ghost, but Daisy was a spiritualist that lived in a little rundown farm out west of Fairmount. I mean, it's hard to get to. And it was like rundown and all that stuff, and so you go to Daisy's house and she'd ask you for $1, and then she would go into, and I see this person in your life that's tall. Okay. So the spiritualism thing was big. Lake Galatia, you know about Lake Galatia? That was a spiritualist camp. And the story about it being bottomless, no, it was just deep. It was a glacial thing. But I think it was about 1890, there was a conflict because the folks that were more Orthodox Christians, I guess, decided to build an addition across the street from Lake Galatia. And they had the spirituals won. So maybe the spirits were on their side after all.
Thank you everyone for coming.